Hey Caleb, this is Robert from Digital Storm. Here's a short little guide on how to use MSI Afterburner to adjust your graphics card settings. First thing that you want to do is go ahead and pull up a web browser and you want to type in MSI Afterburner, and should be the first link that pops up here. Just go ahead and download that, run it and install it normally, and it should open up by itself. And once you've got that done, it should look like something like this right here. Go ahead and switch that back. Before I begin, the reason why I'm offering this solution is because most graphics cards that are made today come factory overclocked from their default settings, and I've had this personally happen to me before with a GTX 980 once, where over time that factory overclock will lose stability, and what I had to end up doing was lowering the core clock right here. I can't remember how much it was. It was like negative 175 megahertz, but it stopped me from crashing basically. It's a nice temporary workaround until you're ready to buy a new GPU, or if you wanted some time to figure out what your options are. But anyway, what you want to start off with is the core clock slider right here, and I would lower it by around 100, negative 100 megahertz, and then anytime you adjust anything on these sliders right here, just make sure you always click that check mark to apply it. And once you've got that set, the best way to test for it is just play games normally. I wouldn't really use synthetic benchmarks or anything like that. I don't find them very consistent. Just play games that you normally would, and if you feel like you're either crashing less or if it takes more time for you to crash, or even better, if you're not crashing at all, that's great. But let's say if you're still running into stability issues, I would just go ahead and start lowering it again on the core clock by another 100 megahertz, apply that, and again, test for it. If you reach a point where you just feel like you're not crashing at all, at a specific core clock rate, the next thing you want to do is you want to start raising it by about 10 megahertz and then just testing that for a while and keep doing that. And let's say I reach 100 or negative 150 megahertz and I'm crashing again. Well, I'll go back to the core clock and go to, let's say, negative 160, and just kind of find that sweet spot where you've lowered it enough to where you're not crashing anymore, but because lowering the core clock rate on a GPU also means you're technically losing performance, you don't want to be excessive about it. And you just want to get away with the bare amount that you need to. And you can go as low as you need to on here. I don't think you should really have to go any lower than negative 250 megahertz, but feel free to experiment with that if you feel like it's still, if you're not getting anywhere or if it's still crashing. Okay, so let's say you have lowered the core clock rate as low as it can go and you feel like you're not getting anywhere. The next thing I would do is go ahead and set the core clock back to its default settings at 0, and then start going through the same process for the memory clock rate. And if you've got that as low as it can go and you're still crashing, go ahead and just lower the core clock rate as low as it can go. And then you'll have to go through the very tedious process of finding which memory clock rate works for you as well as the core clock rate. From my experience, I've never really had to mess around with the memory clock rate in order to stop a graphics card from crashing again. It's almost always related to the core clock, but feel free to experiment with that as much as you want. The last resort that you could do is you could try increasing the core voltage to 100%, and again, going through that process of elimination of lowering it by 10, 25 percent until you reach that sweet spot. The reason why you want to use the core voltage as a last resort is, of course, whenever you're increasing voltage, you're increasing power usage as well, which means more heat. Not necessarily a bad thing, during the winter, thankfully, but you, of course, don't want to be using more power than is necessary. So this is the same process that people use to overclock. So if you ever want to do that in the future, it's something to keep in mind. But if you have any questions or if you run into any issues or need clarification on anything, just feel free to let me know. Thank you. Bye.